he absolutely was the inspiration, because at this point we had another dog that had passed away, and I had said to my wife, that's it, no more dogs. I don't want any more dogs. I can't deal with that, all of that stuff, and the sadness and all the rest of it. But then one night my wife was away from home, and I was sitting alone on the couch, and I was just like, I want a dog. So when she came home, we went out and we got Sam, and we brought him home, and I was out in the yard playing with him one day, and he was scampering around doing puppy stuff. And I just thought, wow, it's so amazing that these goofy little creatures are related to these big, bad, tough wolves of the Ice Age. And I was like, bing, that's the story I want to tell, right?
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
I'm so glad you came out to hear this conversation tonight, and I've been thinking about how to introduce these two wonderful writers who you could drown in the number of awards they've won and the number of books they've published. So I thought I'd just talk about how Thomas Wharton and André Alexis are both authors of prize-winning, best-selling first novels that basically rocked our socks in the 90s. Icefields in Tom's case, and Childhood in André's. They've both had books on Canada Reads. They've both been translated, published, and lauded far beyond Canadian borders. Tom's novel, The Logogryph, was shortlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award, which is a really big deal. And André won the Wyndham Campbell Literature Prize for a body of work. And both of them have spent years teasing out and then unveiling the qualities of the places they live. Tom, the whole province of Alberta, basically, the trees, the mountains, the winters, the open wounds of Fort McMurray. And André, who was born in Trinidad and Tobago and came to Canada at 4, Southern Ontario, especially small-town Southern Ontario, which he has studied with the passion and devotion of someone who has never taken his belonging for granted and has turned into a place of myth and mystery. Both of them have been praised for their sentences, the poise and lucidity of their prose that warms you, surprises you, pleases you, and then rewards you with a really sneaky philosophical resonance. And both of them are brilliant, but their prose never insists on that brilliance, which means it's the kind of prose I most especially love. Both of them are daring, understanding that stories make their own realities to the benefit of us all. And then, for the purposes of this conversation you're about to hear between these two wonderful writers, both of them have spent considerable time dreaming and writing their way into the perspective of living beings who aren't humans. In André's case, most notably to this point in 15 Dogs, which won the Giller Prize and showed me, among many other things, how a dog might feel about the smells of Toronto. But also in his new collection, Other Worlds, in which he bends all kinds of things, realities, and a horse does speak. And in Tom's case, I have to mention the closing act of the novel he published before the one he's here to talk about tonight, The Book of Rain, which is the just most marvelous epic poem, kind of like a epic of Gilgamesh, only it's written and translated from the language of birds. It's a remarkable feat. And then his new novel, which is the excuse for bringing these two together tonight, Wolf Moon Dog, Tom explores all the many fabled lives of a dog named Wolf, reincarnating through the ages from the first wolf who ended up at a human campfire to now, where our companionship with dogs is one of our most enduring relationships, revealing our own natures as much as it reveals what it is to be canine. So I'm really happy you're here. I'm really happy they are here. Please come to the stage, André Alexis and Thomas Wharton.
So I'm more or less the host for this evening, and I'm happy to talk about Tom's book. I want to say a couple of things before he does his reading. because we're likely to talk about things that are a little bit obscure or philosophical or whatnot. And I thought it would be really important to emphasize that Wolf Moon Dog is an extremely funny book. It's parodic, it's filled with bad jokes, it's amusing in a way that is almost unsettling, because at the same time as it is that, it's also a secret history of human progress, human storytelling, human thinking, so that although the focus is on dogs and various, sometimes famous dogs, really it's human storytelling that's his subject and human silliness as well. So I think Tom's going to read a passage and then we'll talk about it.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Anne, for that beautiful introduction, and André as well. I'm really thrilled to be on this stage with you, and I can't wait to see what we're going to talk about. I don't think the jokes in the book are all bad. I think there's some decent ones. But you're right. This was the most fun I ever had writing a book, and it's definitely the most lighthearted. And I think that's simply because I couldn't write about dogs and not feel happy, right? So a lot of that comes through in the book. So I'm going to read a section from early on about a wolf named Wolf, appropriately, who lives in the Ice Age, and he's kicked out of his pack and is forced to, in order to survive, to kind of figure out if he can cozy up to these strange new creatures who walk on two legs and wear animal skins and do all sorts of strange, weird things. So he meets a human boy, and they agree to, I should mention that Wolf can talk, right? This is a novel, but it's also a fable, and so the animals can talk most of the time, not always. There's scenes where they can't talk to humans. But he can, in these early scenes, talk to the boy. So they team up to do things like hunting and guarding the camp and so on and so forth. And that's where this passage begins. Before dawn one morning, the boy came to Wolf without his weapons. "I thought of something else we can team up on," the boy said. "What do you have in mind?" Wolf asked. "It's better if I don't say too much ahead of time. Trust me, it'll be great. You'll see. Just go along with whatever happens and don't embarrass me." "I don't know what that means." "It means just follow my lead." Wolf followed the boy over a hilltop and down into the next valley, where some other humans were camped that Wolf hadn't met yet. A few of these strange humans were already up and around, making fires and cooking food. As the boy drew near, the humans gave him a smile and a nod, but they eyed Wolf warily. "I guess they're still not sure about me," Wolf said. "Just be cool," the boy said. "I don't know what that means either." The boy led Wolf to one of the humans' portable caves made from the skins of the hunted and whispered that he should just wait to one side of the entrance, just out of sight. Then the boy made a soft sound, like a bird cooing. After a moment, the door flap lifted and a girl came out of the cave. You're here early," she said to the boy. "Oh, I've been up for hours. I always go for a swim in the lake first thing. Then I climb some trees to look for eggs. Then I check my rabbit snares." "Uh-huh," the girl said. None of what the boy had just said was true, Wolf observed, but he thought it best not to comment. It seemed that being cool meant more of what the boy called pretending. "Do you want anything to eat?" the girl asked. "Not for me, but if you've got any leftover bones for my. At that moment, the girl caught sight of Wolf. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, so loud that Wolf ducked his head and prepared to run. "Oh my God, he's beautiful," the girl said. "They said you had one of these, but I didn't believe it. Will he let me pet him?" "He will," the boy said, eyeing Wolf pointedly. The girl squatted down to Wolf, and to his stupefaction, she plunged her hands into his thick mane. "Oh my God, you are just the biggest sweetheart ever." Wolf glanced at the boy in alarm. The boy nodded. The next unnerving thing the girl did was to cup Wolf's snout in her hands while she made kissing noises at him with her lips. "Mwah, mwah, mwah. Oh, I love you," the girl said. "Mwah, mwah, mwah. Who's a gorgeous guy, huh? Who's a gorgeous guy? You are. That's right, you are. Yes, you are. Yes, you are." As if it had a will of its own, Wolf's tail began to wag. "I'm just going to keep you handsome," the girl said. "That's all there is to it. Would you like to live with me? You'd like that, wouldn't you? Yes, you would. Yes, you would. You would like that. Yes, yes, yes." Wolf agreed that this did sound like the key to absolute joy, but for some reason he couldn't form the words. His heart was turning mad circles in its bone cage. The girl stood up. "Just a minute, I'll find him something," she said, and off she went at a trot. Wolf started after her. "Don't," the boy said, towing him in the ribs. Wolf lay back down, his head spinning. He'd lost sight of the girl. Was she coming back? She wasn't coming back. He didn't know what he would do with himself if she never came back. After a long agony, the girl returned with a meaty bone. Wolf rose to greet her, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. Again, the girl plunged her soft hands into his fur. "I missed you too, sweetheart." She gave him the bone, and he set to work on it. Meanwhile, the boy and the girl went off a short distance and talked for a while in soft voices. They joined hands, too, for a little bit. Then they came back. "You come see me anytime, gorgeous, okay?" the girl said to Wolf. "You're my boyfriend now and nobody else's. Got that?" Wolf gazed up at her with his tongue hanging out and his tail going mad. Then it was time to head home. "Let's go," the boy said. Wolf followed reluctantly. He kept looking back at the girl who stood at the door to her cave, blowing him kisses. They went back across the valley and over the hill to their own camp. Neither of them spoke the entire way. They could have been walking in their sleep. "Well," the boy said when the camp came into sight, "you made a complete fool of yourself." "Did I?" Wolf asked dreamily. "Oh, yeah," the boy said. "It was perfect." Thank you.
I was actually going to read from a novel that I'm writing now, which is closer to Wolf Moon Dog, and is a kind of, not a sequel, but it takes off from where 15 Dogs started. But for the sake of this conversation, I wanted to read something about Trinidad and about land, because reading Thomas's novel and the end of, and specifically the previous novel, the idea of land and how it talks was something that resonated with me. So this is the start of a short story called Contrition, an isekai. In 1857, Trinidad was green and mountainous, held in the blue palm of the ocean, the skies above it as blue as the sea, but for the clouds, those wisps of white and gray hurried along by ocean winds. At that time, the British were largely avoidable. One could live in the forests, say, or on the outskirts of villages, if one knew how. And this Tamana Modeste did know. He had lived all his life on the edge of a Carib village that had no name, not far from the ocean, the wide sea expanding before him as he ventured up a mountainside, looking for the plants and minerals he needed for his trade. Magic. Tam Modeste, a Carib from generations of Carib Indians, a Buyes from generations of Buyeses, was naturally wary of the British. Born in 1788, he and his family had lived through the savagery of Thomas Picton's reign, the torture and murder of anyone who so much as knew about obeah or magic. Picton had unintentionally driven the Modeste deeper inland, and this was something for which Tam was grateful. But his mistrust of the British had hardened into something like superstition. And although he had encountered very few Britons in his life, only 2 in fact, British was the name of a wall beyond which his curiosity did not venture. The wall, however, was not static. It moved, it was alive, always coming his way, he felt, so studiously avoiding places where Britons might congregate. Tam had explored, perhaps more fully than any of the Modestes before him, the interior of the island where he was born. He knew its hills, groves, grasses, rivers, minerals, and stones, as well as he knew himself. He knew the kobos, mapipis, toads, howler monkeys, tattoos, iguanas, congarees, and bachak, as well as he knew his own family. If it can be said of sorcerers in general that their familiars, the animals who accompany them and help them in their tasks, are expressions of themselves, aspects of the sorcerer's being on earth, it can be said of Tam that the entire south of Chalebe, the Carib name for Trinidad, and thus his name for it, was as alive to him as his desires as a black cat or white dog might be to a witch. He was a man who chose solitude, one who was at home in the bush through hurricanes, blinding storms, and lightless nights. He was private and hard to find, and yet at times he was desperately sought by those who needed the succours that come of obeah curses, spells, tonics, potions, and powders. Being as great a bouillesse as he was, it was inevitable that Tam should be spoken of and gossiped about. The knowledge of his whereabouts was precious, and that was speculation about what he could actually, and so was speculation about what he could actually do. It was said of him, for instance, that he could command the winds and rains. This was an exaggeration. Tam was rather so sensitive to the state of the land that he could predict where and when it would rain, where and when it would not. It was said of him that he could speak with all manner of creatures, birds in particular, so that if, say, someone had lost an important thing, however small, Tam could call on the animals to find it. This was, in essence, true. He could not so much speak to animals as he could reach the place in himself where his will and the will of the creatures around him congregated, speaking through the intercession of the land itself, communicating as beings who shared a womb might communicate. It was in this way that he tamed the various snakes that lived near his hut, including a mapipi balsane, a 7-foot-long viper who watched over his property at night, and whom Tam called Coco. It was said finally that although he was even-tempered, he had caused a number of deaths. The deaths had come when men, jealous of his knowledge, had tried to force him to do their bidding with threats of violence. Most of these men were victims of snakebite, but at least 2 had been eaten alive by bachak. Their corpses and remains had been found far from Tam's hut, but it was known that, if you could find Tam, it was unwise to vex him. These stories were true. Coco had bitten a half-dozen men who'd approached the hut at night. Whatever their business may have been, they were bitten by the viper, and 5 of them died. About these deaths, Tam was not unhappy. As to the bachak, those tiny, rough fire ants, they had been sent by Tam as warning to a man who'd threatened him. The bachak had flooded the man's hut in such number that they were like a reddish tide, madly biting all the things they touched. The one who threatened Tam survived, but his wife and child did not. And though the man never dared to approach Tam again, the death of his family was one of 2 profound regrets in Tam's life. I'll stop there. When did you start writing? How old were you?
Oh, I was pretty young. And the funny thing is, I used to love animal stories, right? Yeah. And, the Thornton W. Burgess books about the Northwest Woods or whatever, where there was a book about bear and there was a book about fox and the rest of it. And I loved those. And so I tried writing some of those myself because I wanted more of them. The library at my school had a few, but I thought I could invent some of them myself. And I didn't get very far with that, but that's kind of where it began.
How old were you when you started writing?
I'd say I was probably 10, something like that.
And when did you know you wanted to be a writer?
That came probably a lot later because this was stuff I just did because I did it and I liked it and I didn't think of it as writing as so much as just doing something I like to do. Yeah. So, making comic books, all that sort of thing, I used to do that without really thinking, could this be a career? But I think it was probably when we moved to Jasper, our family moved to Jasper when I was starting high school. And I was a huge Lord of the Rings fan. And suddenly we had moved to this landscape that I felt like I'd plunged into the middle of Middle Earth, right? I was in Middle Earth. And that was enormously inspiring. And it started to make me think about how I could maybe write about places like this and tell stories like that. And so that's probably where the first twinkling inklings of that as a life's career, perhaps. Yeah.
So did you know you were going to be a writer after your first book or before it?
Oh, well, that's a good question because, yeah, you know, you write a first book and somehow you do it. You don't know how you did it, usually, because you've never done that before. And somehow you persevere and you get this thing finished and you still feel like maybe a fraud in some ways. Like, I don't know, I don't think I did that the way a writer's supposed to do it. I did it in my own weird way, right? So does that really make me a writer? And I think people talk about how it's not until you tackle the second book that you can really say to yourself, yeah, I guess that's...
With me, it was my seventh. At that
Oh, is
point,
that
I'd
right?
been writing for so long, I knew I wasn't good for anything else.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you become a writer by default as
Yeah.
opposed to, choosing it.
Yeah.
But there was a moment where I think I was in my 50s. It was just before
Mm-hmm.
I wrote 15 Dogs, where I just thought, well, this is the path,
Mm.
and there isn't really any other. And so kind of by default, I'm a writer. And that
Mm-hmm.
actually settled me down because I was worried I didn't have a lot of money.
Okay, yeah.
Canadian writer is the best way to experience economic distress.
Yeah,
And so I was experiencing economic distress, but had resolved for myself that this is how I wanted to experience it if I had to. So I was 57 at that time.
Wow, yeah.
You?
How old was I?
When you just decided this was it?
Well, my path was a bit different because, I realized I probably couldn't feed my kids just on writing books, so I pursued a degree, a doctorate degree, and then I started teaching. I started teaching creative writing classes at the University of Alberta, some of the same classes that I had taken when I was a student there. So I just kind of, waltzed into the same room, but on the other side of the desk this time. So that's what I did for many, many years to pay the bills, with the writing kind of having to be fitted in where it could be. So, that's kind of the...
Do you feel that there's a kind of progress from book to book? I'm specifically asking that because I think Book of Rain wanders into Wolf Moon Dog in an interesting way. Do you feel that the books that you've done have accumulated not just expertise, but a way of thinking about the world?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think if that's true, that one book sort of trickles into the next, it's probably in many hidden ways that you can't always consciously access, right? You write a book, and then you think, okay, that's it, I'm done with those people and with that story and that world. You start working on something else, but yeah, things come up and you realize, oh, I guess I'm revisiting this theme or, this situation again, but in a different way. So I guess I haven't finished saying what I wanted to say or exploring what I wanted to explore. So I can see those things running through.
Or that the previous book asks a set of questions that aren't answered in that book, but that are answered in the next one. It's like a relationship. A relationship ends because you've done something stupid. And you can't fix it, but you can not do that stupid thing in the next one.
That's right.
That sort of
Yeah.
feels like there's
Yeah.
a continuity in that way.
Yeah.
Do you have any objection to having your work qualified as environmental? Is there something about like you being is an eco literature? Is that what they call you?
Yeah, I think the Book of Rain has been labeled an eco thriller, and I think I might have come up with that one myself because I didn't know what else to call it, and I thought that sounds like it'll sell better than eco thriller. So I think we all have to be environmentally conscious these days. It's in our lives in a big way all the time, right? This gorgeous weather we're having right now is so fabulous, but I always have in the back of my mind, well, there's reasons why it's fabulous that aren't so fabulous, right? I think it's just something that it's permeated our lives, and I can't ignore it. It just sort of comes up as I write, even if I'm not planning to write about it. It finds its way into the work.
And now go to the specific. How does Alberta fit into your work? I can speak for myself and say, coming from Trinidad to Canada,
Right.
my obsession with how different Canada was to Trinidad meant that I concentrated on Canada in a way that maybe otherwise I might not.
Right.
And moving from Toronto to Ottawa was again a revelation of a medium-sized city to a very big city, which at first I hated, but which I was able to actually kind of sink into by observing and feeling what it was like. Does Alberta figure in all of your work in some direct way or some indirect way?
It's probably more indirect than anything because, I think my situation is very different. I grew up on the prairies. I didn't come from somewhere else. I was born there, but it was a place that I just wanted to get away from in my imagination for whatever reason. I always felt a bit like I didn't belong in that part of the world. The things that my friends were interested I wasn't interested in, like cars and stuff like that. So I always felt like a bit of an anomaly, and my impulse was always to use books and literature as a way to expand my world and find other worlds to live in, at least imaginatively. So I never really focused on writing about Alberta as such. With the first novel, Icefields, of course, it ended up being set in Jasper, but its initial versions were very more sort of fantastical. It was a place that was kind of like Jasper, and it was kind of like the Rockies, but it got grounded more and more in that particular place as it went along. But after that, I just kind of, I thought, well, what do I know, right? Okay, yeah, sure, I know Alberta, I guess, but what else could I write about? And I realized, well, I spent my life in books, so I'll write about books, and that's where the next novel came from. It was all about books, and it ranged all over the world, right? So,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So I always feel like there are not just two, but two poles for writers. One, in my case, I write in order to discover home, but in your case, and in Jan Martel's case, he writes to get away from home. He grew up sort of like constantly traveling, and it's sort of interesting that he reproduces that travel in his work in some ways. So I guess you would share something more with Jan than with me, than that you want to go elsewhere.
I think so. Yeah, that's where my imagination, seems to want to go with this dog book, right? It was inspired by a puppy that we brought home with us, Sam. He absolutely was the inspiration because at this point we had had another dog that had passed away, and I had said to my wife, "That's it, no more dogs. I don't want any more dogs. I can't deal with that, all of that stuff, and the sadness and all the rest of it." But then one night my wife was away from home, and I was sitting alone on the couch, and I was just like, I want a dog. So when she came home, we went out and we got Sam, and we brought him home, and I was out in the yard playing with him one day, and he was scampering around doing puppy stuff, and I just thought, wow, it's so amazing that these goofy little creatures are related to these big, bad, tough wolves of the Ice Age. And I was like, bing, that's the story I want to tell, right? Where was I going with that? In a roundabout way, I was coming back around to your question, but
I'm just being told that we only have 10 minutes left.
Oh, whoa.
That
Wow.
passed. But I wanted to ask you about, because at the end of Wolf Moon Dog, in the afterword, you do say that there is something suspect about using animals to communicate a message or in the way that writers have used animals. Can you talk about that a little bit? What are you wary of when you write a dog? And then I'll let you know what I feel.
Yeah. It's the idea that we take animals and we use them as representations of what's inside us, right? They just become sort of stand-ins for what or who we are. That's what the fables are kind of all about, right? A fable, it tells us some kind of moral tale using an animal as an exemplum of that moral failing or moral flaw or whatever it is. And I think that's totally unfair to what animals really are within themselves. But at the same time, I think we do that, we tell these tales about animals, fables and other stories about animals, because we're trying to figure out what we are, who we are, And we always look to animals to kind of tell us, right? Even little kids are so drawn to animals, I think because in a way they're trying to figure out who or what they are in the world. And animals for them are a kind of model in a very basic sort of way. And so that's why I thought, well, okay, this is going to be a fable about fables, about the way that we tell stories about animals, specifically dogs.
And so for you, actually, rather than being, and the book is kind of a series of vignettes, interviews, poems, jokes, moments in the kind of historical life of men and dogs, starting from the Stone Age and going to the future. So, in fact, at the same time as you're telling fables, you're telling the kind of history of the way we tell each other stories as well. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah.
So in that way, you're not talking about dogs at all. You're using dogs to
Yeah.
talk about history and our way of storytelling.
Yeah, I guess the way I'd put it is I'm putting a dog-shaped lens over things, right? And sort of seeing history from a perspective of, well, how do dogs fit into this? Where do dogs fit into this? How do we connect to them, and what sorts of stories do we tell about them? How do we use them? So, yeah, I mean, and history is just replete with endless stories about these relationships.
So difficult question. If it were possible for us to actually know how an animal thinks, to be able to see the world from a dog's perspective. I mean, I'm always going back to Wittgenstein, who said, if a lion could speak, we would not understand it.
Right.
What would happen if we could understand animals? Is there the possibility that we would lose the otherness and so not have that passage to kind of imagination? Or is it possible that it would take us in another place if we actually knew what a dog is thinking when it's licking your face?
Yeah, I think we would discover we would find ourselves in a very different kind of relationship and world with them. And, you know, we might actually end up heading in that direction. You know, we've got AI and this incredible technology which now can translate whale sounds, and there's dogs now that have those buttons that they press to speak words. Does anybody use those with their dog? Just curious. I've thought about trying that with my dog, but it just seems almost kind of scary. Anyways, these things seem it's like technology can bring us closer, a little bit closer, anyways. And so who knows what the future of this will be? How close we'll be able to get to understanding these other creatures. But to me, I think the most important thing would be not for them to learn how to speak to us, but for us to learn how to speak to them more like in their language than having them be forced to try to learn how to speak our language.
For me, it's fascinating because we make the assumption that our ratiocination, our intellect, is what makes us superior to animals, or superior to dogs, cats, or whatever. Whereas, you think about the ultimate goal of any species, which is survival, and you think about how our intellect is, in fact, a tool or, in fact, something that hinders survival.
Yeah.
And then you wonder if the way that we think is in fact something that helps us or not, if we're going to be able to kill ourselves through bombs and whatnot, and whether in fact we need to learn how to think without using our intellect. There's a moment this is an interesting moment in Plato, in the Republic, where Plato compares philosophers to dogs, because dogs have by instinct a way to distinguish between someone who is good and someone who is evil.
Right.
And he uses that as the basis to how to think better. And I'm thinking, well, actually, shouldn't we be sharpening our instincts? Shouldn't we be going away from our intellect?
Yeah, I think we get ourselves into real trouble by being so big-brained, right? And we can learn a lot from dogs and other animals about going back to instinct and looking at the world more in that way. I like to think, the way I like to think about it is that the only species on this planet that invented garbage was us, right? There was no such thing as garbage before modern humans came along. So how brainy was that, right? How brainy was that to fill the world with awful crap that we don't need? A dog wouldn't do that. A dolphin wouldn't do that. So they've got this evolved wisdom that's been part of them, that's involved in them for millions of years. And I think we're, in a weird way, we maybe at one time way in the past, like, in the Ice Age, we were really close to them in a way that we lost. But maybe we can come back again, and we can figure out how to use their wisdom that's, as I say, has been around for millions of years, to fix some of the problems that we've caused ourselves. I don't know. Yeah.
There's a note of hope in that if
Yeah.
we can distinguish between what is garbage and non-garbage, maybe that means we can do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's time for you to read another passage from
Okay.
Dog.
I just wanted to say, Andre, the last page of 15 Dogs absolutely wrecked me emotionally. I don't know how many of you have read that book, but on the last page of that book, one of the 15 Dogs, Prince, is granted, as he's dying, he's granted one last reunion with his long-lost boy, Kim, and they run towards each other on the prairie, and I can't read that without, tearing up. It's just absolutely heartbreakingly beautiful, and there's just wonderful moments like that in that book. Okay, let's see. Yeah, okay, well, we've talked a bit about philosophy and stuff like that, so I think maybe I'll read a chapter in which, as I say, Wolf, he lives in the Ice Age at first, but then he's reborn many times throughout history. So he ends up in many different situations, interacting with many different humans. And in this chapter, he has been reborn in ancient Greece. "Look at that worthless, flea-bitten cur," the passers-by said, shaking their heads, "lounging around in the sun, doing nothing useful." They weren't talking about Wolf, but about the human he kept company with in those days, a philosopher who lived on the streets like a beggar and whom everyone called the Dog. If you know your Greek philosophy, then you know who this is. Diogenes the Cynic was called the Dog, and you'll soon see why. "Yes, I'm a dog," the philosopher would say to anyone who flung the name at him as an insult. "I love the good, I bark at the unkind, and I bite the wicked." It was the barking he excelled at. The Dog was notorious for lobbing harsh words at anyone he felt needed them. "Most people go through life asleep," he said. "This is how I wake them up. You can't teach anyone anything with niceness. It just lets them off the hook." The philosopher's most frequent habitation was a large clay storage jar tipped on its side in a sunny corner of the agora. During bad weather, there was just enough room inside the jar for dog and human to curl up together and keep warm. For every townsperson who mocked the philosopher and spat at him, there was another who came respectfully to hear his teachings, and these visitors often left food in thanks. Food that the philosopher happily shared with Wolf, who had started hanging around the jar one day and never left. The visitors would sometimes comment on how lucky this scruffy little mongrel was, out of all the strays that infested the town, to find this gig as the companion of a wise man. The truth was, the Dog had gotten most of his ideas from Wolf. From Wolf's lack of possessions, the philosopher had learned the value of owning nothing and making do with whatever leftovers and cast-offs came his way. When someone mocked or threatened him, he was ready with a sharp retort. He pissed and shat in public and pleasured himself in front of whoever happened to be walking by. He often said he wished he really was a dog so he could lick his own balls. "If you want to live a good life," he maintained, "follow nature." When asked for specifics, he would gesture to Wolf lying beside him in the sun and say, "Take this lazy mutt as an example. He idles his days away without shame or remorse, accepting with a shrug whatever life brings, and he's happy, the happiest creature I know. If you want to live like that," sorry, I lost my place here. "If you want to live like that, start by giving away what's hanging around your neck and weighing you down. House, possessions, wealth, friendships, dump it all. Shun society and its hypocrisies, forget ambition and fame, and you will walk as a free man among the chained." Usually the humans who asked the question would thank the dog and walk away sadly, knowing they didn't have the courage to follow such a hard road. "What is so wrong with wealth?" a rich young nobleman once asked the dog. He and his companions were infamous for marauding drunkenly around town, picking fights and causing mayhem. They had stopped to fling taunts at the philosopher, and a crowd, anticipating some entertainment, had quickly gathered around them. The dog said nothing in reply to their japes and jibes. He sat there lazily scratching his armpits. "Look at me, all of you," the young nobleman said, raising his arms and turning in a circle. "Look at my fine robes and jeweled sandals. I have a beautiful house with an army of servants. I have a smoking hot mistress, a ready purse always full of cash, and the fastest horses in town. Admit it, I have the life you all wish you had. Even this big phony sitting here making a virtue of his dirt and sores secretly envies me. What do you say to that, dog?" The philosopher left off scratching his armpit, lifted a buttock, and farted. The crowd tittered and guffawed. The young nobleman's face turned even more scarlet than drink had already made it. He roared, lunged forward, and kicked the dog in the face. Wolf jumped up, barking madly, and the nobleman's friends leapt in, ready with the cudgels that they had concealed beneath their cloaks. In a few moments, it was over. Wolf and the dog lay on the stones, bruised and barely able to move. The young men walked off, laughing and slapping each other on the back. With the show over, the crowd dispersed. The dog spat out a tooth. "Fuck them," he said. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it likely wouldn't be the last. With the dog, philosophy was a full contact sport. It might be time, Wolf reflected, to move on. Thank you.